Okay, hello Year 7. You have made it to pretty much the end of summer term, the end of your first year of Holland Park, and you're going to go out with a bang on one final piece of creative writing in the form of a non-fiction article about voting. So, you might have noticed in the last couple of days that you maybe haven't heard that much about voting in the past. That's quite understandable since you're, 12, 13 years old? It's a few years before you're going to be allowed to vote. But this is something that's really important for everyone in society to talk about and think about, partly because, well, there's some people who want younger people to be able to vote. So maybe you would be interested in campaigning and lobbying for that too, if you think that you actually are interested in having a stake in what happens in the country earlier than 18. But anyway, that's a matter for another time. What you came up with yesterday was hopefully a plan that you can use in your answer. If you have got a plan, please copy and paste that into here so that it's ready for you to write. And if you haven't got a plan, I'll just quickly go through a few ideas that you could use. So for the anecdote, remember we looked at South Africa, we looked at the suffragette movement. You could try and imagine, for example, a little short story, a very short story about what it would be like to be perhaps Nelson Mandela in a prison for 27 years because he wanted to be able to vote. Or you could talk about the suffragettes who also end up in prison, force-fed through a tube, losing their lives in order to be able to vote. So you could maybe tell an anecdote about that. Or you could use the anecdote of a family member, the people that you spoke to for the sort of brief interview. You could talk about why they chose to vote, why it meant something to them, perhaps to feel represented, perhaps to try and change something about the world that they're in, to have a voice. Or you just imagine something completely, but it's always really helpful to have some sort of anecdote in a persuasive piece because it takes a really big thing like voting and makes it human, it makes it personal. Then your argument, what reasons will you give for needing to vote? Well, that video that was up yesterday, the one from, I can't remember what the organisation's called, that was giving really good reasons why you should vote, mostly they boil down to it's how we are represented as people, it's how we make sure that our voice is being counted. If we're not voting, our voice is going to struggle to be counted. So you could come up with various reasons why it's very important to vote. Maybe it's about honouring the people of the past who wanted to be able to vote but couldn't. Maybe it's about wanting to change things in your community. Maybe it's about wanting to feel like you are acting on behalf of others who also need change more than you. So I'll just introduce you to Stacey Abrams' organisation. She is someone that might be chosen as the vice presidential candidate in America. She ran a very close race in the state of Georgia, which is a historically quite right-leaning state towards the Republicans, but it has a very large black population. And she very nearly won a Senate seat, which was very impressive. But in her election, there were, let's just call them irregularities. People were turning up to vote for this person, Stacey Abrams, and there were places where the polling station was not being run properly, let's say. There were people who had to queue for many, many hours because there weren't enough polling stations. And this was often in the black communities that wanted to vote for her in big numbers. So a lot of people felt like that election was quite close to not being fair. It's a thing called voter suppression, where in America especially, the Republicans suppress the votes of people who want to vote for the Democrats. So they will put fewer counting stations in areas where they know that lots of Democrats will turn out, or they make there's often sort of suspicions that maybe machines aren't maintained properly, which means that it slows the process up. Or they just make sure that there's fewer polling stations at all, which is going to make it harder to vote. And if it's harder to vote, if you're thinking, oh, well, I don't know if I really want to spend 6 hours queuing to vote, maybe I'll just not bother. Well, that's their purpose, ultimately, is that they want enough people to just not bother. Because if they don't bother, they won't vote for people like Stacey Abrams, and then the black people of Georgia don't get the representation they deserve. This is all very simplified. There are people who would suggest that this characterization of it is inaccurate, but those people are probably mendacious liars. So, this is Stacey Abrams, and this is a very current case. I know that we talked about South Africa, we've talked about the suffragettes, but this is an example of an advanced democracy, America, where she has now had to start a massive organisation, a big charity that's fundraised loads of money just to make sure that everyone is able to vote. So that means that often in America they will delete people off the voter registration lists because of inactivity or because they've not messaged in something quite fast enough. They'll do everything possible to make sure that certain people aren't able to vote. There's also a whole fight brewing this autumn where Donald Trump doesn't want mail-in votes. Why does he not want more people to vote? Well, he thinks that if more people vote by mail, they will vote Democrat, which is a problem for him. So you can see that actually today, in advanced democracies, who gets to vote is really contested. And why do people care so much? Well, it's very important. Why would they be arguing so much over something that's not important? So, your argument could be around the idea that yes, it's very good to protest, and yes, it does often cause change, but ultimately, if you vote out elected officials, then they will have to listen to you. So that brings us back to the counter-argument. What reasons might people give for not voting? So some of you said that you spoke to someone in your family who hadn't voted yet. Well, some people might say that their vote doesn't matter that much. You could give all of those ideas. And then some facts. Lots of people had some statistics about what kind of people vote. Young people, maybe you could be encouraging young people to get out and vote because they can make a huge difference. Statistics, you could give those statistics about what percentage of people did and didn't vote at the last elections. That was in the lesson we did earlier in the week. And then a solution. So at the end of your article, like with the poverty one, where at the end I said, why don't you tell the Prime Minister what you want to be done? At the end of the article, give a solution of what you think should be done. Okay, so I've laid it all out so that your article will be in lovely columns. As long as you write between these two dotted lines, you're going to need to, well, you've got your headline, and then at the opening of an article, they have what's called a lead. So there's a short summary of what you're going to argue. So it might be something like, voting is the most important thing you can do as a citizen. And then it says by, put your name there, and then you write the rest of your article there. So just summarize your point here for your whole argument, or make some sort of statement about the argument. It's called a lead. So this is just a short paragraph that kind of pulls the reader's attention in a little bit, because they're like, okay, this is what this person is going to argue. I've left you a little summary of the things you're looking for in a broadsheet article. These were the things we looked at yesterday. In case you didn't get them, they might give you some clues about how to write this really well. So, off you go. You should fill like three columns here with these different sections of your argument. The code word for today's lesson is a film that I really love by one of my favourite directors. It's called Before Sunrise. The code word is Before Sunrise. Very much recommend it. Trilogy of films. Have a lovely day.